kind of worked out with the fact that we got a bunch of food back to cooking if it's not overly long, but I never know really till I get going how long they're really going to be. But I don't think it's going to be that bad today. So we've been in this series of How to Neighbor. It's been different. It's been a different series than what I think we're used to. This is the fourth and final week of it. The very first week we talked about racism. It was called Races Reconciled. The second week we talked about orphans and fostering. It was called Orphans Embraced, how the church does that. Last week we talked about the poor, and it was called Poor Empowered, and how we as a church move towards the poor and how we treat them and handle them. And how also that we are all in that category at some point in time in our lives where we're all lacking something. This week is geared towards the lonely. If I asked a bunch of people, what do you think, who do you think battles loneliness? You get a lot of answers like the widowed battle that, older adults, senior citizens battle that. But really, if we look at who really might be lonely, we probably have to look at a much broader look at that. Something has popped up that's called relational poverty, and not to be mistaken with poor empowered last week, but relational poverty has nothing to do with materials, being poor in that way. It has to do with people who are lonely and feel alienated along those lines. So there's this relational poverty that is going on in the world where people are, unfortunately, more and more people all the time, but we don't actually feel that way. We feel, a lot of people are feeling very lonely nowadays, whether they sit in a crowded room and you feel all alone for some reason. So many stay-at-home mom and dads nowadays, they feel like they're alone. You may work around a lot of people, but if you don't have a single close friend in a group, even though there's lots of people there, you might feel alone. College students, surrounded by thousands of people and living in dorms with lots of people, but if there's nobody you trust, you might feel all alone. You might be a successful business leader, you might be the top of your game, but if there's nobody you can open up to, you may feel all alone. Even if you're in a marriage, and maybe your marriage is a little dysfunctional and not going in the direction you may want it to be going, you may feel all alone. So yes, there's this financial poverty that's out there, but there is also this relational poverty where we feel alone and like we're going out, financial lacking material, earn wealth to meet our daily needs, but really so many of us, it's relational poverty where we're lacking of the feeling of love, lacking empathy, support, someone to listen to you, somebody to share your stories with, and it can be a very lonely place that we all have to deal with at times. So this relational poverty, it's a big issue today, and maybe more today than yesterday, and I'm sure it's going to be more tomorrow than it is today. So 4 things that causes this relational poverty that we're being told about are the breakdown of families is the first one. We have a big, huge breakdown of traditional families. You split maybe from who you consider to be your best friend, so you lose that relationship of your husband, your wife, and then you know what happens with that. Maybe you do go to a church, but now all of a sudden you guys got to split the church, and who gets the church, who gets the friends, right? So there's this big loss there of so many couples. Only one will stay in the church they're in. Only one person gets to inherit the friends. So there's this breakdown of families, which is leading to this feeling of poverty. increased mobility, okay? People don't stay in one place anymore. If you think about it, there used to be a time where you would probably take a job out of high school and that's where you'd stay to the day you retired. For many people.
46 years.
46 years, right. And now most people are lucky if they get the 4 part of that.
An hour, 10 minutes.
Yep. So we're constantly hopping around job to job and state to state. And so many different things like that. So we have this increased mobility where nobody's stable anywhere. We have these heavy workloads. You know, and you know how that is. Hi, hey, how you doing? I'm busy. What are you doing? I'm busy. Right? So we have these heavy workloads. And one of the big problems we have is the rise of social media. Where else can you have 2,000 friends go into the hospital and not have one person come to visit you? In the world of social media, right? There's no intimacy with social media. There's none of that. And as a matter of fact, what happens is people feel lonely, so what do? They take these selfies and they post them out there and then they wait for someone to respond. So social media is sharing with our relational poverty. We don't know how to be friends anymore, real friends to each other. So the question for us is, how do we love the lonely that are in this world? And I think it starts with, we have to ask God to give us eyes to see those that are hurting. And we also have to ask God to give us hearts that care, but sometimes it's harder to care than at other times, so we have to pray for those things. And when you start to ask God to open up your mind for that and your heart for that, you might start to notice people that you never noticed before, whether it be, you know, the person sitting two rows down from you. It might be somebody at the office that you've noticed, where they're just constantly getting overlooked and nobody seems to notice them. It may be the elderly person that has lost their spouse. It may be that teenage child that's just not fitting in wherever they go. So there's so many different things we have to look at. So how do we love the lonely? The first thing we do is we love the touch. Okay, now this isn't the touch that's going to get you in trouble with the police. Okay, we don't want to go down that road. All right. So here's a little bit of the story. Okay, a man with leprosy came and knelt before him and said, knelt before Jesus, "Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean." Okay, so this guy has leprosy. Coming before Jesus, kneeling down to him, saying, "Jesus, please, if you're willing, you can make me clean. I know you can do it," right? So this man with leprosy, if he was left untreated, all right, he would die in about 10 years' time with leprosy. He would start by feeling generally just fatigued. It would go on to feel pain in his joints. Eventually, he would develop like scaly spots would start to form on his body, and eventually his body would be covered with lumps filled with pus. Eventually, his face would start to change. It would resemble a lion a little bit. There would be growths on his vocal cords that would change his voice. His body would start to decompose, and eventually it would develop an extreme stench from what he's going through. And to make matters worse, if he went anywhere, somebody would be yelling and screaming, "Unclean, unclean," to let everybody know that you were coming and to stay away from you, right? Probably have torn clothes, because you'd be expected to tear your clothes to show that your hair would probably be falling out. And nobody for years would touch you. Sounds like a terrible existence, doesn't it? When you really get down to that. So this is what happens. Jesus reached out his hand and touched the man. "I am willing said, "Be clean." Immediately he was cleansed of his leprosy. If you think about it, Jesus did not have to touch this man. We see lots and lots of miracles that Jesus does without touching anybody. Jesus could have just willingly said, "Yeah, I'm willing to cleanse you, be clean," and that would have been the end of it, right? Why do you think Jesus touched him? Why do you think the gospel writer makes it a point to tell us that Jesus touched him, knowing the circumstances? Perhaps it was because the leper didn't just need to be healed from the disease he had, but he needed to feel love over the rejection that he had all those years. Jesus didn't have to touch him. He chose to touch them. He knew what he was doing by touching them. By touching them, people would have been just shocked that he touched them. And they would have been concerned that he had touched them, that he was going to get it too. And yet here he is touching this man, saying, "I am willing," and then he cleanses him. Something about that loving touch Jesus knew was needed in that man's life to really, really heal the hurt that had been done to him. The other thing we need to do is we need to love by listening. Most people, we listen with the intent to reply. We're always thinking, and if someone's talking to you, you're always thinking, all right, what am I going to say next? What am I going to say next, right? So most people listen with the intent to reply. I think Jesus would tell us to listen with the intent to understand. Okay. And there's evidence of this, where after Jesus is crucified, he's come back to life, and his disciples really aren't all aware of that yet. And he sees two of the disciples walking, and he starts walking with them, and they don't really recognize who he is. And Jesus asks them, he says, "What are you discussing together as you walk along?" Right? And we're told that they stood still. Their faces were downcast. And one of them asked him, "Are you the only one visiting Jerusalem who does not know the things that have happened here in the last few days?" Right? Now Jesus could have said, "Hey, it's me, Jesus. Behold my glory. I'm alive." Right? But he doesn't do that. He also probably could have gone into, well, here's what you need to do, and here's how you need to handle the situation, and here's what I would do, and all that. He doesn't do any of that. But what's he say? He goes, "What things?" He asks them further questions. Sometimes we need to try to focus in on being interested instead of just not being interesting all the time. And I think one of the questions, one of the tools that Jesus does so well is that he asks questions. He asks questions in the Bible. I think those who are truly the best at conversation somehow have the gift of getting people to open up. And the person I can think of that is actually Tracy. I hate to give her credit. But there's so many times she'll get home late at night, and Aurora, you're supposed to be home an hour ago. What always happens with her is she starts to talk to somebody, a family member of somebody that she sees, and they open up to her, and they just tell her their life story. And I don't know what it is, and she's always said that she somehow, that's what she attracts. She attracts people who want to tell her everything. And I don't know what it is, but something about her, she must be a good listener or something like that. Because people will just continue to tell her your stories. So I think that's kind of a neat thing that probably more of us need to work on. And if you think about it, the word listen has the exact same letters as the word silent. Maybe those two go together a little bit. I don't think we say enough. We don't say things like, hey, tell me your story. I'd love to hear more. How can I pray for you? We always want to fix something, especially us men, right? Especially us men with women, we always want to fix it. That's what we do. We fix things. Instead of sometimes you just need us to listen. Because often people just want to be heard. And my job, I can't remember, I can't always remember what I've told you guys and what I haven't told you guys. My job a couple months ago really took a turn in a different direction. I became the boss, and I'm still trying to adjust to that, being a boss. But I cannot tell you how many times people come into my office, will shut the door, and just talk. And I sit there, and in the end they get up and saying, thanks for letting me vent for a few minutes. And it's all it is sometimes, is they're not necessarily wanting you to respond. They're not looking for feedback. Sometimes they're just looking to talk. It's for someone to listen. They simply want somebody who will understand and care, and that is where Jesus always comes in. Because he always understands, he always cares. And the reason he always understands us in our lives today is because he lived a life on this earth. So he knows what we go through. The other thing we're going to do, last thing we're going to do, is we're going to love with time. Okay? Jesus is always going somewhere, but he was never rushed. He always had time for everybody. When speaking to a crowd, I mean, here he is in the middle of this sermon that he's giving and everything, and these knuckleheads go up to the roof, put a hole in the roof, and they lower their friend down who's paralyzed, right? So this is what happens. I mean, Jesus probably could have been like a lot of pastors in this day and age. He probably would have been pretty upset. Hey, you're interrupting me and all that kind of stuff. But what does he do? He takes the time and he heals the man on the mat. Even when he's sleeping on the boat, and the disciples come up and they wake him up because they're afraid. And he could have been really mad, like some of us would be if we were woke up from our nap or our sleep or something, but he didn't. He came and he rebuked the storm. He was on the way to perform healing for somebody, and a woman comes up and touches his robe because she believes that that'll heal her, and he feels the power go out of him. So he doesn't just, turn around and snap at her, but he takes the time and he stops, even though he's going to do something else, and he takes the time to speak with this woman. One of the greatest gifts we have is our time. Is the time that we have. And what's going to happen is so many of us are going to know somebody who's going to pass away. And we're not going to, after they're gone, we're not going to sit there and say, I regret that he or she didn't have a better house. We're not going to say, I regret that he or she didn't get to travel to exotic places. I regret that he or she didn't get to buy nicer gifts. You know what we're going to regret? I didn't get to spend enough time with that person. Even if it's somebody you saw almost every day of your life, even if it's that kind of a relationship where you knew this person really well, the number one thing is if I could only have just a little bit more time. If I could see that person one more time, if I would have been there a little bit more. Our time is the greatest gift. And unfortunately, so many people battle with that loneliness because there's nobody to give them that time. And that time, perhaps, would be what would bless somebody. You can't impact everyone, but you can impact someone. It's not good to be alone. So what if you feel alone? That's the question. I'm going to go with the version I have because I like this one a little bit more. I didn't ask for it. Don't you be afraid, for I am with you. Don't be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you. Yes, I will help you. Yes, I will uphold you with the right hand of my righteousness. You may feel alone from time to time. And if you're here today and you have felt lonely in the past, then you know what? You're not here by accident. God has brought you here. He has brought you in the midst of other people who want to be around you. He has brought you in the midst of people who want to care about you, who want to love you. Because God cares about you. And God loves you. So we, as His disciples, as His followers, need to take on the same attitude as God does. We need to love with touch. We need to love by listening. And we need to love with our time. And give that time to those people who really, truly need it. Is the one thing we all regret. Is if only I had more time. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we are so thankful to be able to come together today to share in this meal that we're going to receive today. God, we know that this week is Thanksgiving week, and there are so many things that we are thankful for. God, most importantly, we are thankful for the relationship that we have with you. We are so thankful for the many, many blessings you have given us in our lives. And we pray that more people are aware of the blessings and more people are aware of your presence. God, we just I pray for each and every one of us here today, this week, that wherever it is we're heading, wherever it is we're traveling to, that you travel with us, that you watch over us and keep us safe, and bless all the meals that we're going to receive this week, and just let us enjoy the time with family and friends, and lead us all back here next week where we can once again worship you. We ask these things in Jesus Christ's name. Amen.